How's it going, everybody? My name is Antonio, and I am back for some resource talks today with a guest who likes to be referred to as a simple peasant who makes many mistakes, but somehow he has set 3 Guinness World Records. He's traveled around the world in a what I can only call sort of a convertible Mercedes SUV type of special thing with a remorque on it. He's written over 20 books and has been more right than wrong, in my opinion, though he has been wrong for sure, as we all are. So we're going to be talking about these things as well. Now, who's not here with us today, though, is your financial advisor. As you would know, this is going to be a conversation that's general and impersonal in nature, and one that will constitute no investment nor professional advice of any sorts, maybe aside from some amateur marriage advice from both of us. And we're also likely to discuss high-risk speculations in this conversation, as well as make a lot of forward-looking statements, educated and non-educated guesses if they're coming from my end, and also share opinions, none of which are good enough to make investment decisions on. So please do a lot more research before pulling the trigger, unless you like losing money. That all said, Mr. Rogers, thank you for investing your time in me, sir.
I am delighted to be here, Antonio. I will tell you that having 3 Guinness World Records doesn't pay the rent. My mother liked it, my father liked it, but it doesn't pay the rent. And I do make many mistakes.
Well, that's a philosophical question. What's more important, paying the rent or keeping your parents happy?
Well, yes. My parents are dead now, but at the
Okay.
time they were quite pleased.
This is what does pay the rent though then in your case? I mean, people are wondering, you're not selling anything online. You go on these interviews and at the end people will ask you, where do people go? What can you sell them? You're not selling anything. So what pays the rent for you right now?
Well, I don't have anything to sell. I guess I have a few books to sell, but that certainly won't pay the rent. Uh, I invest, and sometimes I get it right, and it pays the rent.
Okay. So you invest for yourself?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, what have you been
I,
investing
I
in
don't
here?
invest for other people. Only I
Okay.
have no clients. I've had no clients in over 40 years.
Well, that must feel nice.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's certainly nice for me. That's why I do it. I guess I could change, but I'm quite pleased not having any clients.
No, I can imagine. I can imagine. This is I want to sort of get down to what you're investing in and why you're doing that, but I want to take the long road here, and why I'm saying that is because this has been the longest bull market in US history that we've had. We're up quite a lot. I don't know exactly how many. I might have, maybe I should have looked it up, but we've been up quite a lot since the last decent bear market, which bottomed in 2009, and it's still going up strong in the second half of 2023. So over 14 years now. But you go out there, you read CNN headlines, and you look at the headline economic data, and you think that we've soft landed the economy, and then it's all upside from here, and we're going to have another 14 years at least of a bull market. I know you disagree, but what's your 40,000 foot view on the economy there, and why is this happening? When does it end? Talk to me about all of these things.
Well, you're correct. Speaking of the U.S. market, the U.S. market's never had such a long up period, 14 years now. So historically, we must be coming to the end, but that doesn't mean it has to ever end. Maybe it'll go on another 14 years. In my view, there are signs that we're coming towards the end. I'm not selling short yet, but I can see, we have a lot of new people coming into the market. They call their friends and they say, I've discovered this new thing called the stock market, and you can make money. And it's easy. It's easy to make money. And everybody's very excited. Some stocks go up every day. I've seen all of this before. These are signs that we're getting towards the end. It's not the end yet, but we're getting there.
Well, but you say it's sort of laughingly that it's easy, but it's just been easy to make money. So you just literally had to buy the most obvious things. Like you had to buy Nvidia, you had to buy Tesla, you had to buy Apple, the most obvious things that you see around you. You buy them, you make money. And then you have me, who I got more serious about the stock market, I think in 2018. And, I tried, I threw everything at it and the kitchen sink. And I was, I'm still learning about geology, trying to play explorers, going into the miners, averaging up in everything that I should not have been averaging up. And it was not easy. And so I haven't made money. But for most people, it was easy to make money.
Well, Antonio, that's wonderful. That's great news. Never been easy for me. Now I know the easy way. I just have to call up and buy Apple, and I can be rich.
Well, that's been the case. That's been the case so far. I don't think it's wonderful news. And if you think it's wonderful news, I'll call my wife and I'll let you tell her that it's wonderful news because she's not super happy about it.
Well, as I say, many people read the newspapers or see the TV or whatever, the internet, and say, I could have bought Apple, but they didn't. And, 1995 or whatever year, 2000, whatever year you want to pick, if it was so easy, everybody would have just bought Apple and everybody would be rich. It doesn't work that way. In 1995, if it were that easy, everybody would have bought Apple and that would be it. We'd all be rich and there wouldn't be any market anymore.
True. It sounds like communism though. So I was going to say that's nice, but that's not nice. I've been expecting a recession. You've been expecting a recession for a while now, just like so many others. And
no, you're not doing your homework. I'm sorry. Why do you say that? I know we're going to have a recession. We've always had recession. I know we will have another recession. If that's what you mean by expecting recession, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, I do expect a recession. I always expect a recession. We've always had them. We haven't ended recessions. So yes, I do expect a recession someday. Sorry, go ahead.
What is someday though? What does that mean?
Oh, I don't know. I guess we should watch your show to find out. I am not very good at market timing. I never have been. So I have no idea when it's going to come. But I do know we're going to continue to have recessions until the end of time. I hope I'm long enough to see many recessions.
How do you use that knowledge though in your portfolio? Because there's this one quote, can't remember who's it from, but it says that more money has been lost preparing for the downturn than it was lost during the downturn. And so like you cannot spend your time apparently preparing for recessions, but you cannot also not be prepared. So what do you do?
Well, as I said, this is not my first rodeo. I've seen some of the signs. I see some of the signs that are familiar, that have occurred before in the past, before there's a recession. I think I see those signs happening again. But as I said before, I'm not selling short yet because I know that hysteria usually gets worse and worse and worse before the markets really give up. So I'm not selling short yet, but as I repeat, I'm not very good at market timing.
What are those signs that you're referring to? What is something you look at? As in, is it the labor market and interest rates and a combination of GDP growth and stuff like that, or is it something else?
Well, it's everything, but especially in the markets, you see, as I said before, new people coming in, they're inexperienced, they think it's easy. They all talk to each other about how easy it is. The number of some stocks go up every day. There are cult stocks that develop, and that number usually gets narrower and narrower, fewer and fewer stocks in that field, in that set, and that's happening again. But to my mind, it's not the top of the market hasn't come yet. But Antonio, I'm a very bad market timer. I've seen this before. I don't know when the time to start selling short will be.
So what do you do? Like, when will you start? Because you're going to go short. Are you going to be sort of, 15 minutes late to the party, but still enjoy most of the party? Or do you wait until, the dancers, to put it politically correct, have arrived? Or like, how do you look at it?
Well, if you can get the exact day, you're wonderful. But there are very few who can do that. My hope is that when I sell short, I'll be close enough to the top for the stocks that I sell that I can make money. Because usually when bear markets start, they go on a long time. they don't end in a week. Real bear markets go on for a long time and can be extremely painful or lucrative for the people who get it right.
Do you have like a go signal though, like something that you're looking at that says Jim go short now?
I wish I did. Wouldn't life be wonderful if it were that simple? No, I don't.
Hmm.
Maybe I'll watch Antonio to find out.
Well, that's not how it works. You're supposed to say, yes, I have this signal, and you can buy it for $100 a month online. That's how you make money in this market.
Well, I wish like my life were that simple.
Does does politics play a role to you? I mean, 2023 is the year after midterm elections, and we've almost never had a down year after midterm elections. So, does that play a role for you?
Well, of course, everything plays a role for me. Try to watch everything, and the statistic or the historic fact you just mentioned is certainly part of it, and that's why I have not been selling short in 2023. I happen to know that in American history, markets don't go down in the third year of a presidential term. They usually go up, but nothing is for sure.
Why is
But
that?
anyway,
I've not
that's one reason. That's one reason I have not sold short this year.
I've not seen that broadly discussed, by the way. I heard it from, I believe it must have been Ken Fisher. He does great like short YouTube videos on a lot of interesting stuff. Cannot recommend it enough. He's made his fair share of money, as you would know, in the market. Why is that? Like, what is that? Why does that matter? Why is the third year of a presidential election most of the times not a negative year for the stock market?
Well, the explanation is that I'm not the only person that knows that there's an election next year. All the politicians know it, and they want to do everything they can to get everybody happy for the election year so they can win the election. Both Washington and state levels as well. All the politicians are trying to make everybody happy or get everybody happy for the election next year. As I
Okay,
said, I'm not the only one who knows there's an election next year. They know it too.
sure, sure. Um, but it seems like the stock market is mostly in the hands of the Fed right now. Like Fed watching has really been a thing since I entered the market. Really, before it was not really a thing. I mean, if you look at the interest rates where they were almost nothing since a given period after the stock market bottomed in 2009, nobody cared about the Fed and Fed data. Like almost nobody was watching it. Now we watch every single step. We watch the days before. It's like, oh, GDP is 0.1% higher. Maybe that means a hike because the economy is doing better. Oh, there's more jobless claims, so the economy's not doing so well. So they're gonna have to cut. And so it seems like the stock market is really the reins of the stock market are really in the hands of the Fed right now.
Well, the Fed has always been, always, it's only been around 100 years or so, but the Fed has always had a big influence on the American stock markets. That central banks everywhere have had a big influence, and the Fed certainly does. They're not the only thing, but they do have a big influence. I mean, if they print a lot of money and spend a lot of money, it has an effect. I mean, if you give me a few $1 trillion, I'll show you a very good time. And that's what the Fed does. When they feel that they should, they print a lot of money and spend a lot of money. I didn't say it was good for the world. It's good for them, they think, but it's not good for the world.
I like conversations like these. I like talking to and I think it might be a function of not having anything to sell online, because if you have something to sell online, if you're selling physical gold, you're more inclined to say that the dollar is going to burn tomorrow. And then, and then if you're selling, some type of a signaling system, you might say that the time to go short is going to be at one specific moment. And, so it oftentimes it's very polarized, but the world is a lot of gray, right? It's not necessarily black and white. So yeah, I appreciate talking to you. I like these conversations.
You just said something very important. I'll emphasize again, there are many factors that make the markets go up or go down, not just the Fed, not just many factors.
I want to talk about commodities, and I'm thinking about a proper segue to make it seamless, but it seems like I'm failing. So let's maybe talk about China and take it through China into commodities because, well, you've been living in Singapore for a while now, and so you're close to China. A lot of the people in Singapore, if I'm not mistaken, are ethnically Chinese. But so I want to get some insights on there because I read an article last week that went over the opinions or a few statements, if you will, of global companies. And those companies, or the CEOs at least, or some of their executives, they were from all over the spectrum, by the way. So we're talking about companies from Anglo-American, the mining company, through biotech, luxury goods companies like LVMH, then MasterCard, Visa, even banks like Citibank, and so on and so forth. And sort of the conclusion on their statements was that well, there were really two types of statements. One of the statements said the Chinese economy is bad, and the other statement said the Chinese economy is really not doing all too well. And so they were saying that it's the most disappointing market, the most disappointing reopening of the economy ever. So I don't know, what can you tell? Do you agree with them? What can you tell me about the situation in the ground in Asia and more specifically China?
Well, China is the second largest or largest economy in the world, depending on who's measuring. So it is important. You're exactly right about that. Chinese economy, from what I read and what I gather, is not doing extremely well right now because they did have a real estate bubble, a huge multi-year real estate bubble. It has finally popped. Beijing tried to calm it down for a long time, unsuccessfully, but something has made this real estate bubble pop. And it was so huge. And whenever a big real estate bubble pops, it's huge. It takes a while, no matter who the country is. I'm not picking on China now. It takes a while for the economy to get over the effects. And that's happening in China right now. But they also had a very big wave of the virus, the COVID virus, and they were closed down for a while. So that's having a big effect, carryover effect. So there are many things affecting China right now. But in the end, I know that the Chinese economy will recover someday, and someday we'll all be making a lot of money in Chinese stocks again. Maybe not for a while, but it'll come back.
That's curious because you've also been, you've been saying that commodities are the cheapest, is the cheapest class right now. And I understand the relative analysis. If you plot commodities against the US stock market, of course, they're very cheap. But if China has a massive bubble burst in the real estate space, that's definitely going to hurt commodities, right?
Well, I'll repeat, you said it. Commodities are the cheapest asset, partly because of what's happening in China. If China's down and copper is down, whether it's because of China or whatever, copper's still down, and copper and other commodities are cheap assets for whatever reason. Maybe it's totally independent of China. But commodity prices, Apple is making all-time highs. The American stock market is near its all-time high. Sugar is down 50% from its all-time high. Silver is down 50% from its all-time. These are not bubble numbers when things are down 50% from their all-time high.
What about the recent stimuli talks in China? Like last Monday, last Monday was it the Chinese top dogs basically came out promising a lot of stimulus for the economy, and specifically for the property sector.
Well, yes, you're right. You read the same press I do. China is trying to revitalize its economy. I hope they can do it. But as I said before, it was a gigantic property bubble in China. And no matter what the country, historically, when a huge property bubble pops, it usually takes a long time for it to recover, for the country to recover. In the late 20s, we had a huge property bubble in the US that popped, that helped lead to the 1929 stock market collapse and the Great Depression. This is not the first time the world has suffered from the collapse of a property bubble.
So when you say that you should be extremely worried. And I'm quoting Yahoo Finance, by the way, is quoting you. They
Who?
Yahoo Finance. So
No, oh,
yeah,
okay,
so
okay.
yeah, so is that I mean you're basically saying that it's inevitable, but you don't know if it's imminent or not. That's what it comes down to.
Well, I repeat again that I am not very good at market timing. I do know we have always had recessions and we always will have recessions. I do know that we've always had bubbles and we always will. And that when big bubbles pop, they have effects. These are historic facts. These are not an opinion. You just look it up.
Hmm.
So I know that the Chinese property bubble that's popped, combined with a huge virus, a huge epidemic, has to have an effect. And some of China's customers are slowing down. I mean, America's not buying as much as it used to. Nobody is. That has to have an effect.
Hmm. That's sort of like uh, I guess basically you're also referring to the lag effects, because now you're talking about the customers of China, one of which is the US, and the US hasn't yet felt, in my opinion, the full effect of the most aggressive rate hiking cycle and the highest interest rates in the last 22 years or something along those lines. So is that going to come? I mean, is there going to be a lag effect or not?
Well, yes, there are lag effects just throughout history. Again, this is not an opinion, just look it up. And we are having a lag effect. But the US has not raised, I mean, they've raised interest rates a lot from where they were, but historically, they're not up a lot. I mean, 5% is not a gigantic interest rate in the US. In 1970s, we had a big inflation problem. The interest rate on short-term treasury bills, government treasury bills, was 21%.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a typo. 21%. Interest rates now are 5 or 6%. I don't know how high they're going to go before this is over, but I know that we've printed staggering amounts of money. And by the way, in 1980, the US was a creditor nation still. Now the US is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. So I would suspect that before this is over, not in July, not this month, but before this is over, interest rates will be much higher.
Okay. So we are seeing higher for longer. But what's going to prompt that? I guess if the Fed is sort of proving that they're soft landing the economy and inflation is going down, at least the way that they like to measure it by using the PCE, what's going to make them raise interest rates even higher? Are we going to reinflate later on in the year or potentially next year? How do you see that?
Well, markets go like this. They go up, they go down, they go up, they go down, but they don't go straight up or straight down. So what's happening now in the US, in my view, is just a normal market. Things are correcting, inflation's correcting. The Fed, they're not very smart people. They're all academics and bureaucrats. They think that they've solved it, that they did it, that they've solved the problem, and things are okay. But when inflation comes back, when we have a rise again, they will panic and raise interest rates again.
Hmm.
These are not very. These are bureaucrats and academics. These are not smart people. That's why they work for the government.
Yeah, it's funny when you say it. I grew up in sort of lower middle class family in post-communist Bulgaria. And so bureaucrats and like academics, especially Western academics, have always seemed very smart to me. And it was until about 2, 3 years ago when I started understanding the stock market better. So,
Well, you will learn, and you are learning apparently, that bureaucrats will tell you they're smart. Government officials tell you that they're the smartest people around. But history is pretty clear that they usually don't know what they're doing. They usually make mistakes and get us all into a trouble,
I agree.
including war.
I agree. And it's interesting looking at the CPI, at least the headline CPI, coming down because the biggest component that's pulling it down is energy. And Oil, coal, natural gas are all down like 70% year on year. So naturally CPI is going to be coming down. But I have a working thought basically that when those come back, because commodities are cyclical, they do come back. When those come back, we're going to see reflation, if you will. Is that something you would agree with?
It says, no, I'm quite sure. Agricultural prices went down a bit and went up, then they've come down, they're correcting for a while. No, agriculture is a gigantic market. If and when agriculture goes higher too, you will see not just energy, but lots of things causing problems.
Hmm. When you say problems, you mean inflation, then I guess.
Yes, inflation. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, how would that bode for the US dollar then in that case? Because people have been again saying that the crash of the US dollar is not only inevitable, but it's imminent, and nothing has been less true recently. So how do you, and maybe you can talk to me about how the situation is on the ground in Singapore. Do people save in the US dollar? Do people trust the US dollar more than they trust the yuan or I don't know, the ruble or something else?
Well, the US dollar is the world's major currency, the world's international medium of exchange for many, many reasons. It has been for a few decades. It's probably coming to an end. Nothing has lasted more than 100, 150 years. We've had many international currencies throughout history. And the US dollar is probably starting to come to the end. Not this month, don't worry, not this month, but it was very strong for a long time. I own a lot of US dollars. I can see that it's going to have problems. I don't know what's going to compete with the US dollar. I don't know what's going to replace the US dollar. If you know, please don't announce it. Send me an email because I want to buy it myself. And I don't see anything on the horizon. You would think that the Chinese renminbi would be the currency, but it's still a blocked currency. So you cannot have an international currency that's blocked. So I don't know what's going to compete with a dollar in the future. I look every day, I assure you.
Well,
But
but
in the meantime, I do own US dollars. They've been very strong for a while. I worry about that, but I'm not sure where I should put my money. I do have some renminbi. I do have a few other currencies, but I don't know the answer.
Historically, though, when we go through these cycles where fiat currency eventually crashes, the currency that follows it up is oftentimes backed by something real. Is that not true?
Well, we haven't had a gold standard or metal standard for a long time. The history shows people periodically have tried metal standards or some metal-backed currencies. The U.S. was founded on a currency that was backed by silver, and for 100 years or so, it was basically a silver-based economy. If you go to parts of the Middle East, they still have much more confidence in silver than they do in other metals. So this is not a new thing that the world has tried something, a real asset to back a currency. Maybe we will try again, but the problem with gold or silver backed currencies is they're problems and they never last because they're problems. The main problem is when things get tough, because gold causes discipline to politicians. Well, politicians don't like discipline, so they change the rules. And it's easy to change the rules, and that's why gold has never really been a successful long-term backer of currencies. Nothing has been.
What about energy? I guess where you represent the currency through the value of energy.
Well, sure, we can have an oil-backed or an energy-backed currency. We can have anything backed in currencies. We can have, seashells. People have used seashells as currency in the past. You can have anything, but the problem with something like that is it causes discipline, and most politicians don't like discipline, and they want something to take the discipline away, so they change the rules.
I'm thinking about the future of the currency, as well as the future of where the power is going to be located, if that makes sense. Because I've read something that says that power sort of shifts from east to west periodically over long periods of time, and it seems like it might be shifting more towards the east right now, where you're at. So that's sort of the insights that I'm trying to get here.
Well, no country has stayed on top forever in history. There are always countries at the top for a while, but then something happens and they lose their situation. And at the moment, yes, history is moving east to Asia. Most of the Western countries have huge debts, as you probably know. The Eastern countries don't have many of them, the gigantic debts that we have in the West. So for whatever reason, it seems to me that the world is moving east again. It has done this many times in history. If you go back, it was 3 or 4 times in world history, at least, that China's been the number one country. They've also had periods of collapse and been the bottom. They've had catastrophe. But they're the only country in world history that's, after being at the bottom for a few decades or centuries, turn around and rise to the top again. I don't know why, but they have done it, and no other country has. It seems to be happening again.
What about some of the new developments, though, in this case, like your CBDCs, for example, that are often touted as central bank digital currencies, that are often touted as a solution to some of these things, where the power can be retained in the West by using central bank digital currencies?
Well, I'm sure we're all going to have digital currency eventually. If you go to China now, you can't take a taxi with money. You have to use your phone, their phone money. You can't buy an ice cream in China with renminbi. You have to use your phone money. They're ahead of the rest of us. Everybody's working on it. I'm sure we're going to have digital money in the future. Central banks love it. It's cheaper. They don't have to print it or transport it or anything. And more important, they know everything you do. Antonio, they know if they're going to call you up one day and say, you've been drinking too much tea this month. Stop drinking so much tea, because they'll know everything you do. They love it. It's not good for you and me, but it's good for them. But it's coming. Will certainly come for a while. Then something else will change. But no, I certainly see digital money in our future.
And how do you use that then? Again, I guess to repeat a question from earlier, how do I use that knowledge to my advantage? If it eventually is going to turn to digital currencies, what does that mean for a portfolio? What does that change for me?
Well, you might want to short the people who print paper money, but it's not going to have that much change on you. You're probably going to, at least, and many people, at least for a while, are going to think it makes their life better, because all they have to do is go on their phone and pay their bills or check their bank or whatever. Many people are going to find it wonderful. Then they're going to realize, oh my gosh, those people in the government know everything I'm doing, and they might not think it's so much fun after a while. But from the beginning, anyway, we're all going to think it's great.
No, it's
me,
how
not me, but I'm not going to think it's great, because I know the consequences with many of us.
So where does that leave us in terms of your investments, given that we're moving towards that world where we're going more and more digital and further away from a real, from real money, basically?
Well, it doesn't change much at all. I mean, we do some of that to some extent now. Many of us pay our bills with credit cards or with bank transfers. We're already doing that to some extent now. So I don't see how it's going to, certainly the investment world is not going to change very much. Might be easier to, if you buy a stock, easier to pay for them, but I don't see that it makes too much difference in our investment world.
So you don't necessarily think that it's going to drive demand for one thing more than another? Because I've heard the case that, for example, That's going to drive demand for tin, because tin is the solder material used for chips. So AI, digital currencies, crypto, all that, it basically needs tin. We don't have a lot of it. Myanmar is going to stop producing tin tomorrow, actually, on August 1. So it's not something that, like, it's not an investment thesis that you have among those lines.
Well, there may be an investment thesis, but I don't know it yet. Are you saying tin, TIN?
Yes.
Well, I don't see that this is going to increase the demand for tin significantly enough for me to invest in it, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Silver, for example, is also touted oftentimes as, it's used in renewable energy, solar panels, and so on and so forth. So it's oftentimes a bull thesis is oftentimes built on those developments in the world for silver as well. But you mentioned something that's maybe more interesting, is that people in the Middle East trust silver more than anything else. What can you tell me more about that?
Well, I'm just talking history. There's some places in Africa and the Middle East where they've been a tin-based metal, a tin-based money system for many years. You remember Jesus Christ? Jesus Christ.
I think silver. I think you mean silver, by the way. I'm sorry for interrupting, but you said tin-based, but you probably mean silver.
No, I'm sorry. If I said tin, I meant silver.
Okay.
And I was about to say, you remember Jesus Christ, he was sold for 30 pieces of silver. He wasn't sold for 30 pieces of gold or 30 pieces of silver, of gold or tin. He was sold for 30 pieces of silver. So silver's been around a long time, been very important. He was in the Middle East where tin was the major monetary, whatever, medium for a long time, as it was in the US. But places have used gold too. Countries or civilization usually use what they have. There was a lot of silver in the Middle East, so they used silver. Likewise in the US, they had a lot of silver. So the original monetary system was based on silver. But then they started discovering gold, and all the gold miners said, no, 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 we should use gold as the monetary base. So they changed.
Are you long any of the metal producers, so be it gold or silver producers or something else?
I am long gold and silver. I don't think, if I'm long a producer, I cannot remember. I don't remember it.
So you're long the physical, actual physical metal, or do you use ETFs or something else?
Yes.
Okay.
I hope I'm smart enough to buy more somewhere in the future.
Okay. Well, that's interesting coming from a person who started an ETF themselves.
Well, that started because I was going to drive around the world, and I wanted to, and I can see the bull market coming to commodities. I wanted to invest in an index because that's the best way to invest if you're driving around the world. But I couldn't find a decent index, so I had to come up with my own index. And that's how this all started 15 years ago, no, 25 years ago, how this all started. I needed something to invest my own money in, and there was no decent commodity index in those days.
Okay. What would that commodity index look like today if you had to make it again? So obviously gold and silver, what else would you put in there?
Well, no, it's got 35 or so commodities. When I set out to do it, I wanted to use the index to be something that reflected the cost of being alive, whether you were a manufacturer or a housewife, whatever. I wanted it to reflect the cost of being alive around the world. And so it had over 30 things in the index reflecting the cost of being alive. And being alive includes manufacturing as well as eating.
Okay. And then as well as energy, I assume, as well.
No, of course. Energy is the most important commodity in our lives, no matter what. If you're sleeping in a bed, that bed was manufactured and transported to you somehow using energy. They had electricity and transportation and everything else. Energy is the most important commodity in our lives.
So how do you view the future of energy in that case? Because we're made to believe that we're going to have this, energy transition and this wonderful future with free, renewable energy that just comes from the air and the sun. Are you buying in that thesis, or do you think oil and coal will remain important for decades to come?
Well, I know oil and coal are going to be important for a long time. That does not mean that other things won't be important too. Yes, in China, there's already a lot of solar energy. In France, there's a lot of atomic energy. The world is making transitions, but these things take a long, long time. Yes, someday you're going to look out the window wherever you are, and you're going to see solar panels everywhere. But, but if you look out your window right now, you're not going to see solar panels everywhere.
Hmm. That's right. We are seeing, however, a lot of countries pivoting towards, or even back to nuclear energy. I mean, talk about one of your favorite countries, Japan, officially restarted their, what is it, 11th reactor, I believe, last week, and there are 13 more awaiting approval, and they're going back into nuclear restarts heavily. And that relates to commodity as well, because we're talking about uranium there. So how do you look at uranium and nuclear energy?
Well, I own uranium, and uranium is atomic energy. Nuclear power is certainly cheaper and more efficient than coal power, for instance, if you do it right. I mean, if you have an accident, you don't want to have nuclear energy. But as long as nuclear energy is handled properly and is safe, it's much cheaper, it's more efficient, and everything else than coal or something else. I mean, the world's only had a couple of gigantic nuclear power accidents in the last 100 years. They were bad, they were disastrous, but two out of 50 years or so is not a bad record. I'm not suggesting you run out and build a nuclear power plant. I'm just saying that nuclear energy is efficient and cheap.
I totally agree with that. And even the disasters that you mentioned are eventually they might even be almost marketing for for nuclear power, because they were not. I mean, the number of people who died, like if you mentioned, for example, the 3 Mile Island quote unquote disaster, which was more of a media disaster than anything else, nobody died. Even the Fukushima disaster, which is one of the worst disasters ever, as you would know, it was not that much of a disaster compared to the deaths that we see from other energy sources, oil and coal, and so on and so forth. So I am all for nuclear power. I am exposed to uranium in a big way myself as well. How have you chosen to do that? What do you do? Are you into the physical ETFs, or into the producers, or
No,
something
I
else?
own shares of a uranium miner.
Okay, great. Well, there's not too many, so I'll just leave that to my imagination to imagine which one it is. Is it just one? You have one uranium stock for your
I
exposure
only
to
have
uranium?
one because I'm lazy.
Well, and that's actually been paying off for you. I mean, it's been a good strategy, so congratulations on that. Um, okay, so what I'm noticing though with uranium and with natural resources, with commodities in general, is a push, and I call it the pivot that nobody's talking about, which is um, many African nations pivoting from their relationships with Europe and the US. Let's dub them the West in this case, OECD countries, to strengthening relationships with Russia and China. Is that a development that you're paying attention to, and that you think is significant?
No, of course, yeah. I try to pay attention to everything in the world, but there is no question that, if you went to Africa 100 years ago, most of them were French or English colonies or ex-colonies. Now, if you go to Africa, there are Chinese everywhere. Oh my gosh, there are thousands, tens of thousands of Chinese all over Africa. The Chinese have replaced the British, or are replacing the British and the French and the Americans, and there are Russians there too, but mainly Chinese. They're everywhere.
Mm. We're
I'm
seeing
not
on
it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's a fact.
Yeah, exactly. We're also seeing there was a coup in Niger last week. Niger is an important uranium exporter. I think a third of Europe's uranium comes from Niger, so it's huge for uranium. But many other countries, it's sort of a belt actually in Africa that's struggling with coups. And a lot of it is speculated to be sponsored by the Russians, and therefore it would have been, a pivot towards Russia, towards east of the new Iron Curtain, if you will.
Well, there have always been pivots in Africa. There have always been pivots everywhere, especially Africa in the last 100 years or so. So I said it used to be Britain and France. America got in there for a while, but now the pivot is towards China more than anybody else in Africa. Again, doesn't matter to me if it's good or bad, it's a fact.
But the colonialism took a long while to complete. Do you expect this pivot is going to be faster than the previous one?
Well, are you calling the Chinese colonialists or
no? I mean when Europeans colonized Africa, it took them a long while, and it stayed there for a long while. Some may even argue that it's still going. So then the pivot that now is potentially happening, Africa pivoting more towards the east, toward their relationships at least towards the east. Do you think that's going to take? I mean, do you think that's going to happen faster?
Whatever it is, it's going to be faster. Now we have airplanes, internet, telephones, TV. None of this existed 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And the British and French started swarming into Africa. They were in sailboats, no TVs, nothing. But it all took a long time.
And this time you're saying it's going to be faster.
Yes, of course. Of course. It already is. I mean, China's already swarming all over Africa. 50 years ago, there were no, 40, 30 years ago, there were 20 years, 25 years ago, there were virtually no Chinese in Africa.
What does that mean then for OECD countries that are large users of commodities, but they're not large producers of commodities? What does this bifurcation of the market tell you for the West? I mean, even for everyday people like me, and what does it tell you for commodity prices?
You're going to buy, somebody's going to produce wheat, somebody's going to produce cocoa, wherever it is, and they're going to sell it. It's not as though the Chinese are just going to go there and produce cocoa and keep it all for themselves. They're going to sell it to somebody, and you and I, some of the people who are going to buy it from them. We're still going to eat chocolate bars. We're still going to drink coffee, which is going to come from somewhere in the world, produced by someone, and whoever produces it is going to sell it.
Well, I was referring mostly to
100 years ago, you didn't know where your coffee came from. 30 years ago, you didn't know where your coffee came from. You didn't care. Now you don't know and you don't care still. Maybe you know, but most of us don't know and don't care.
I was referring mostly to hard commodities, by the way, Jim. So when we're talking about your uranium, where China has very little domestic production of uranium, but they're building nuclear power plants and they're licensing new nuclear power plants like it's nobody's business. So they're going to need a whole lot of uranium. And one of the places they can get it is Kazakhstan, potentially Uzbekistan. There's a lot of exploration stuff like that going on there on a government level. So we don't hear much about that. But another place is Africa. So I'm wondering what that means in uranium case specifically, but it's not only uranium. Gold can be one of those as well, silver as well. So how do you look at the hard commodities?
Well, I don't see that much different. Yes, there are times when countries have weaponized commodities in the 70s. Middle East weaponized oil for a while. So yes, we have periods when countries, if they can, weaponize a commodity, but mostly those, if you cannot remember very many cases because the few cases that have occurred don't last very long. In the end, somebody wants to sell their commodity because they need the money. Or the black market will develop. Even if country X tries to, use its commodity as a weapon, black markets develop. Black markets have been around thousands of years, and they will continue.
So this bifurcation of the market that's going on right now, this new invisible iron curtain, you suppose that's going to fall sooner rather than later?
For instance, the Russians are selling huge amounts of oil all over the world, and a lot of people are buying it because Russia needs money and they need oil. Yes, the US and others have put sanctions on the Russians, blah, blah, blah. But there are a lot of people buying and selling oil, Russian oil, all over the world.
It's funny you should mention that. I read a story about Dubai and Middle Eastern millionaires buying up old ships from European countries that, due to regulations, cannot longer use those ships, but they're perfectly good ships to carry oil, and they use it to transport Russian oil. Again, a semi-black market, a dark gray market, if you will, that's developed almost instantaneously.
Black markets have been around for hundreds of years, if not longer, and will always be around. One of the reasons sanctions have never been very successful is because somebody figures out a way to get around the sanctions and black markets develop. I'm not saying black markets are good or bad. I'm just saying black markets are a fact of life and always have been.
Even in something that is as sensitive as uranium, do you think that's going to happen?
Of course. I mean, I assure you, if you need some uranium, you can get it. Maybe not today, but if you put your head to it, you will figure out a way to get some uranium.
Yeah.
You need any uranium, so I'm not looking. But if you need it, figure it out. You can get it.
It's true. Russian uranium still ends up in the U.S. There's no hard sanctions on uranium right now from the U.S., but Russian uranium still ends up in the U.S. even though it's really hard to get it there. I mean, it always finds a way. It's funny you should mention it because it's really being true. So that's that. Can you often say that you make a lot of mistakes, but talking about everything and anything here so far for some 45 minutes or so, it seems like, I mean, obviously have a pretty good grip on how the world works. Can you give me examples of mistakes that you make, just so I know not to make them myself?
What, you're going to hear about my first wife?
Sure.
What a mistake that was. And at the time I was unhappy about it, but after not much longer, I realized this is a good thing, this mistake. I learned from it. And so if you make mistakes, there's nothing wrong with mistakes in life or markets or anywhere, but if you learn from them, they can be extremely educational. And it's usually because people don't do enough homework. I remember in 1980, I think it was, on a Friday, I sold short oil. Oil had been going up a lot. Well, that weekend, Iran and Iraq went to war. Needless to say, on Monday, the price of oil went through the roof, and I had to cover my shorts. Now, you can say, oh, that was an accident. How could you know? Listen, somebody knew. Somebody knew that armies were moving. You don't just have a war without a lot of armies moving and a lot of troops doing this and that. I didn't know, but somebody knew. So the more homework you do, the more likely you are to get it right.
What's the lesson with your oil mistake there, though? Don't go short oil or something along those lines?
No, I have certainly made money shorting oil in my life. It's just be sure you know what you're doing. I did not know that Iran and Iraq were going to go to war that weekend. I don't know how I would have figured it out, but somebody did. I mean, Iran had a big army. Iraq had a big army. Somebody knew. I didn't know. I guess if I'd been on the ground or flown to the Middle East and looked around, I could have figured it out, but I didn't. But somebody knew. Saddam Hussein knew. Somebody knew.
Yeah, I guess. But if we talked about the Niger coup. If you want to go long uranium developers in Niger right now, you can't really fly to Niger and talk to people before you make that investment, right?
Well, with all due respect, I beg to differ with you now. Wasn't involved enough with uranium to care, but if I were really worried about it, I would have focused and I would have listened to BBC Africa or something, read African newspapers. There are ways that people could find out that there was enough unhappiness in Niger for there to be a coup. I mean, coups don't just come around one afternoon. It takes a while. There's a lot of unhappiness, disappointment, anger. All of these things build up before you have a coup.
Hmm. You're definitely right. What if this is sort of an obligatory question, but feel free to tell me that it's a silly question and you're not going to answer it. But if you had a gun to your head right now and someone told you that you have to deploy all of your net worth in three sectors, it can be any country, any sector, whatever it might be, in just in three different type of investments, what would you do with your money right now?
Well, for how long? For a week or a decade? Uh, uh, a decade, I would have to say probably silver, uh, agriculture, maybe Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan has been, as an old Russian, was a Soviet republic, so it was ruined. Now the people running Uzbekistan seem to be doing things the way you and I would do things. So I guess agriculture, silver, Uzbekistan. Those are the first three that popped to mind. But I'm sure later on this evening I'll have other answers.
Uzbekistan is interesting because I was to a conference in London late last year, and they had Uzbekistan's government had a huge stand talking to investors there, and I didn't even know it was a thing. And I think most people don't even know. I mean, obviously, I know that Uzbekistan is a thing as a country, but I didn't even know that investing in Uzbekistan was a thing because they've been a very private country. Feel everything has been locked, as you said, post communism. So what do you do in Uzbekistan? Like, what do you invest in? Infrastructure, commodities, technology? I don't know.
Everything you just said make it sound like a good opportunity to me. Smart, knowledgeable people like you don't even know about it. There is a stock market. There are huge natural resources, great tourism assets, opportunities. I'm simple, so I invest in stocks. But 30 years ago, there wasn't much stock market. These are all new developments.
Right, right. And I mean, the work that you're doing, is that desk research? Have you, been there on the ground and doing your research there? How do you figure out even investment opportunities in a country as obscure as Uzbekistan?
Well, I've been to Uzbekistan 3 or 4 times, so it's one reason I know a little bit about it. It's one reason I know there are gigantic natural resource opportunities and tourist opportunities for somebody to exploit. And apparently somebody is exploiting those now. And the more research that you do, the more you might find.
Okay. Okay. Well, we've talked about so many things. I normally do sort of a recap towards the end of a conversation, but we talked from the U.S. recession to interest rates to we went to China. We talked about all the commodities that I could have think of, even the soft commodities. What is something that you want to talk about? You do a lot of these interviews, but what's something you want to talk about but nobody ever asks you?
Well, you've done a pretty thorough job. I've talked about more than I expected to, so I'm quite satisfied. We didn't talk about places we didn't talk about, but doesn't matter. We've talked about enough.
But what's one thing? Give me one thing that you think is important, but not many people are talking about.
Well, we didn't mention South America. It's a gigantic continent. Not doing much of anything in South America, but you and I didn't talk about it today. If you look at a globe, some people might say, wait a minute, what about South America? The gigantic population, gigantic land mass, gigantic commodities, gigantic stock markets, etc. You just had things you hadn't mentioned. I don't have any action around with South America. I don't think I have many, if any, investments in South America right now. I was just answering your question about what you might have left out.
Hmm. And you make a very good point, because it absolutely escaped me. But you're so right, because there's so many commodities. There's a lot of silver. There's a lot of copper. I mean, we didn't talk too much about copper, but one way or another, after this thing, after a massive recession or a Chinese property bubble or whatever it is, we're gonna have to recover, and that's gonna be copper intensive, and a lot of it is gonna have to come from South America, one way or another. So that you make a very
Well,
good
what
point.
I read, we're all going to have electric vehicles. Electric vehicles use much more copper than gasoline vehicles. So maybe there are opportunities in copper.
Hmm. Maybe. Yeah. Do you have any exposure to copper right now, Jim?
Anyway,
Any exposure to copper?
I do because I have my index, my commodity index, and it
Okay.
has copper.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Well, this has been great. Again, we went through a lot. There is a lot that we did not talk about, as you brought up South America. So I'm hoping we can do this again. I really enjoyed our conversation. Your website is jimrogers.com. So anything else that you want to leave people with
But
here
my
that they can
there's
find?
nothing on my website. I mean, it does give my public schedule, which is rare now because of the virus. I'm not selling anything on my website that I can think of. No, I don't. I don't have anything to sell, and so I'm a simple person.
I appreciate you, Jim. I really appreciate this conversation. So thank you so much for investing your time in me today.
It's been my pleasure. I do hope we can do it again sometime.